All right, are you ready for this? Buckle up, because we're about to dive headfirst into a classic whodunit.
Ooh, I love a good mystery. What do we got this time?
Picture this. You're on the Midnight Express.
The Midnight Express.
Yeah, hurtling through the night. Everything's kind of rocking gently. You're getting lulled into a sense of peace, and then, bam, murder.
Oh, wow. So right away, we're talking murder mystery.
A murder most foul. Our victim, a Mr. Richard Hayes, a wealthy, and I mean wealthy diamond merchant, is found dead in his compartment.
Okay, so a wealthy diamond merchant on a train. This is giving very Agatha Christie vibes.
Right, totally. But here's the kicker. It's a locked room mystery.
A locked room. That's classic.
The door bolted from the inside, the window sealed tight.
So the question is, how could the killer have gotten in? And more importantly, how did they get out?
Exactly. It's like a puzzle with very high stakes. And luckily for us, there's another passenger on board, Detective Sarah Blake.
Oh, talk about being in the right place at the right time.
Right. Almost too perfect. It's like she was meant to be there. So let's put on our detective hats, shall we? And join Detective Blake as she starts piecing this whole thing together. She arrives at the scene, and Mr. Hayes is slumped in his chair, his leather bag, the kind a diamond merchant would carry, still clutched in his hand.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. It's like he was interrupted suddenly.
Makes you wonder what he was doing right before.
Exactly. And the cause of death.
Yeah.
A brutal stab wound to the chest.
Oof. Sounds like someone wanted him gone for good.
No kidding. And right off the bat, there are 3 clues at the scene that really jump out.
The seemingly insignificant details that could crack the case wide open. I love this part.
Me too. It's all about the details. First, a blood-soaked kitchen knife.
Okay.
Found under the seat.
A kitchen knife. Not exactly what you'd expect to find in a first-class compartment, is it?
Not at all. Then there's a train ticket stub on the floor, smudged with ink.
Interesting. Could be from anyone, really.
Right. And finally, a half-empty glass of wine on the table. Makes you wonder if Mr. Hayes even had a chance to, enjoy his drink before the killer struck.
Right. Did he even finish his drink? Or was he interrupted? So many questions.
So many questions. And speaking of questions, we've got a whole cast of characters to consider. Let's start with Miss Evelyn Carter, shall we?
Miss Carter.
Yeah, the glamorous socialite type, dripping in diamonds. She claims she was in the dining car the whole time, didn't even see Mr. Hayes that night.
Alibi seems solid, but is it really?
That's what we need to figure out. Now let's move on to Mr. Alfred Grayson.
Okay, Mr. Grayson. And who is he?
Oh, he's a businessman, kind of gruff.
I see. The tough businessman type.
Yeah, and he openly admits to having a heated argument with Mr. Hayes earlier that day, but claims after the disagreement, he went straight to his compartment.
So motive, maybe? But was there opportunity? That's the key.
Exactly. And then there's Mrs. Clara Bennett. Now, she's a bit more of a quiet character, a maid. Turns out she used to work for Mr. Hayes, actually.
Oh, interesting.
But she insists that she didn't even know he was on the train, that she was in her seat the whole time. But there's just something about her demeanor,
You're getting that detective intuition. Is she nervous? Hiding something?
Right. Something's just not quite right.
Those are the best kinds of clues, the ones that don't fit quite right.
Couldn't agree more. And last, but certainly not least, we have Mr. Oliver Price.
Okay. And who is Mr. Price in this whole setup?
He's the train attendant, the one who served Mr. Hayes that last glass of wine.
The last glass of wine. Now, that's interesting.
Right. He claims he served the wine and then went to assist another passenger.
Another passenger? Do we know who?
Not yet. But there's something about his eyes, like he's holding something back.
That shifty look. Always a good indicator that there's more to the story.
Totally. So there we have it. A locked room, 3 intriguing clues, and 4 suspects, each with their own secrets and possible motives. It makes you wonder, where does Detective Blake even begin?
It's like a giant web, isn't it? Each suspect, each clue, just adding another layer to this whole mess. So many possibilities. Who did you initially suspect?
Oh, I gotta admit, at first, I was kind of leaning towards Mr. Grayson.
Mr. Grayson, the businessman.
Yeah, that whole argument with the victim, it just seemed like such a strong motive, right?
Right, classic red herring. Designed to throw us off the scent, make us think it's the obvious choice.
But like you said, things are rarely that simple, especially in a locked room mystery.
Exactly. The argument, it could have been staged.
Staged.
Yeah, maybe a deliberate attempt to draw suspicion towards Mr. Grayson while the real killer, slips out unnoticed.
Oh, that's sneaky. And what about Miss Carter? She said she was in the dining car the whole time, but did anyone actually see her there?
That's the thing about alibis, isn't it? It's one thing to claim you were somewhere, but you got to back it up. Was there anyone who could actually place her in the dining car?
Good point.
Yeah.
Anyone who could corroborate her story.
Or could she have snooped out unnoticed, maybe using all the commotion in the dining car as cover?
Ooh, clever. Now, that makes me think about that hidden service panel. If Mrs. Bennett could use it to get away, could someone else have used it to get to Mr. Hayes?
Now you're thinking. That secret passage, it's a game changer. It basically throws the whole locked room concept kind of out the window.
So it's not really a locked room?
Well, not in the traditional sense. The killer could have gotten in, done the deed, and then vanished, poof, leaving the door locked from the inside. It's classic, but done really well in this case.
It's almost like magic,
Yeah.
Making the impossible possible. But remember that ink smudge on the ticket stub?
The ticket stub, yeah.
It matched the ink on Mrs. Bennett's gloves.
Oh, right. That tiny little detail. It's like a breadcrumb trail straight to Mrs. Bennett. It's what we call trace evidence, right? The tiniest clue that links the suspect to the crime. Even the most careful killer, they always leave something behind.
Always something, huh? And once they showed her that evidence, she admitted to talking to Mr. Hayes in the hallway, putting her, just a little closer to his compartment.
But was it just talking? Or something more?
That's what Detective Blake had to figure out. Why lie about something like that?
Right. What was she trying to hide? Detective Blake needed to peel back those layers, see what was underneath.
And the truth? Well, it's a lot more shocking than we could imagine. Turns out, Mr. Hayes had fired Mrs. Bennett years ago, accused her of stealing. Seeing him on that train, it brought all that anger back up.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a powerful motive. Years of resentment just simmering, waiting to explode. And it really makes you think about the psychology of it all, doesn't it? What drives a person to do something like that?
It's intense. And it wasn't just the firing. She felt humiliated, betrayed, like he had ruined her reputation, made it almost impossible to find work.
Right. The impact of a false accusation, it can be huge. Not just losing a job, but losing trust, losing your sense of self.
And for her, those feelings, they just festered for years until finally, she grabbed a knife from the dining car, went to his compartment, pretended to apologize, and then things just went really bad. And she even admitted to trying to poison him first with the wine.
Oh, wow. So a two-pronged attack. Poison and a knife. She was really ready to make sure he was gone, huh?
It's chilling to think about.
Yeah.
All that planning down to the escape route through that service panel. She was ready.
But even with all that planning, it was that tiny ink stain, right? The one that brought the whole thing crashing down. Every action, it has a consequence. You can try to erase your tracks, but there's always something.
Like she said, there's always something. So Detective Blake, she solved the case. The midnight train murder, a story of revenge, planned out so carefully, but in the end, justice was done. But it does leave you with some questions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Like, what if Detective Blake hadn't been on that train? Would anyone have ever found out the truth? It's kind of scary to think about. Makes you wonder about the role of chance, how the smallest thing can change everything.
Totally. And what about the other suspects? Did they play a part in this, even without realizing it? Like, could Miss Carter's alibi have been more than just a coincidence? Was she really trying to hide something? And Mr. Grayson, was that argument with the victim a setup? Or was he just, an angry businessman?
That's the thing, isn't it? We might never know for sure. But it shows just how complex people are, right? All those hidden motives, all those tangled relationships, it's never just black and white.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about solving a puzzle, but about understanding the people involved, why they did what they did, the choices they made, and how those choices they affect everyone else.
Absolutely. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, think about this. What do we learn from this case? What does it tell us about human nature? What can we learn from Detective Blake's work, how she observed, how she put it all together?
It's wild how a locked room mystery on a train ends up being a deep dive into, people, human nature. We've looked at all the clues, the suspects, all the twists. But for you, what's the thing that sticks out the most, like the most insightful thing?
It's the reminder that everybody has a story,
Yeah.
a past. And that past, it shapes what they do in the present, like Mrs. Bennett. Years of feeling wrong, that anger, it built up, and it led to, something awful.
Yeah, it makes you think, about how we deal with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hurt, anger Got to find a healthy way to deal with it, or it could.
Right, it can really take over.
It's so easy to get caught up in solving the puzzle, figuring out who did it, but you got to remember the human side of it, the people involved. What about Detective Blake? What impressed you most about how she worked the case?
She was empathetic. I think that's key. She didn't just see suspects, she saw people. Individuals with their own backstories, their own struggles.
She saw them as people, not just pieces of a puzzle.
Exactly. Think about how she dealt with Mrs. Bennett. It wasn't just about the evidence. She wanted to understand why. Why did she get to that point?
That's a good skill to have, actually, not just for detectives, for all of us.
Right. Being able to connect with someone, understand what makes them tick, even if you don't agree with what they did.
Makes me think of that quote. Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle.
Totally. And it's so true, especially these days when everyone's so quick to judge. That kind of empathy, it's more important than ever. Now, the locked room itself, that was a good twist, wasn't it? The hidden panel, the escape.
It was. It played with our expectations, what we thought was possible.
The writers were definitely challenging us to think differently, to question everything. And the answer, even though it made sense, it was still a surprise, like magic. That's what I love about locked room mysteries. They force us to look beyond what we see at first glance, to remember that there's usually more to the story. The truth is hidden somewhere. Just got to find it.
It's like they say, truth is stranger than fiction.
Right. And sometimes it takes someone like Detective Blake to find it. So, after all this, what do you think? What can we take away from this whole deep dive? What can we use in our own lives?
I think the big takeaway is just how powerful observation is, and deduction. Detective Blake, she showed us how to look at the details, how to connect things that seem totally random. And those are skills, honestly. We could all use those, whether it's at work, in relationship.
Right. Being curious, asking questions, noticing patterns, not just accepting the easy answer, but digging deeper, searching for the truth.
Exactly. And even though this was all, made up, fictional, the stuff we learned, it's real. Empathy matters, observation matters, and every action, it has a consequence. That's real life stuff right there.
It is. So the next time you hit a wall, you face a problem that seems impossible, think about Detective Blake. And the Midnight Train murder. Take on the challenge, question what you think you know, look for the connections you're missing, and never, ever underestimate the power of a sharp mind and a kind heart.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Until next time, keep those minds sharp, keep those hearts open, and remember, the truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.